Welcome to Beyond Business, the program where we look at some of the latest trends in the global economy. This week, we're asking whether Europe and France are running out of ideas. There are a few countries around the world in which philosophers are household names, but France is one of them, and it seemed to have a rich philosophical tradition. Thinkers like Voltaire, Descartes, and Camus have contributed greatly to Western thought. There are growing fears, though, that the golden age of French philosophy is over and that France's role as a laboratory of ideas is coming to an end. Is France losing a war of ideas? And if so, what are the consequences? Our reporters went to a gathering that brings together French philosophers and other intellectuals to find out more. Let's take a closer look in this report produced by Soumaya Benaissa, Marlène Aberard and Jessica Lemazurier.
Not an event normally shrouded in controversy, but the annual Blois Rendezvous de l'Histoire, or history gathering, held in central France last October, found itself facing calls for a boycott. A group of young intellectuals said that giving the inaugural address to French philosopher Marcel Gauchet was a mistake. The 2014 theme was rebels, but they said Gauchet was the opposite, a reactionary.
They have to show me the facts, the printed words, the actions that justify these completely dreamlike accusations. For the last time, there is no controversy. The use of the word is being abused. This is an attack with ulterior motives that I don't understand and that's based on nothing.
His critics say the facts can be found in Gauchet's articles about French society, like saying a lot of current problems stem from the events of 1968. As for the right of women to have children, he said that leads to the marginalization of the father figure. Geoffrey de la Gannerie was among those who called for the boycott. He says Gauchet's views are symptomatic of a growing problem in French intellectual life.
The call for a boycott was for us a reaction to the way the intellectual domain has operated in France for the past 20 years. We believe that one of the duties of an intellectual is to reinvent the issue at the heart of the subject being debated. We think that unacceptable opinions do exist, and that the role of the intellectuals is also to show how opinions, which are supposed to be part of the debate, are actually violently reactionary. Those that assert whole groups of the population should be considered inferior.
In his work, this young philosopher who teaches in an art school focuses on the 1970s, an epoch when French critical thought held huge influence in the world through figures like Bourdieu, Foucault, Derrida, Deleuze, and many others. Geoffrey de la Gannerie argues that a critical thinker should always ask themselves for what and why they are writing.
Right for the general public, right for the social workers, right for the activists, right for oppressed people, to give them weapons in their struggle. That's the point where ideas don't just become a conversation, but a meaningful action. Ideas that intervene and change things. From this point of view, it becomes a suitable forum for ideas.
The École Normale Supérieure in Paris holds a strong tradition of providing a home for ideas and has, at several points in its history, played a key role in French public life.
The École Normale was one of the biggest defenders of Captain Dreyfus. The history of the school is full of these powerful moments, where intellectual requirement has supplemented a strong, active political engagement.
Many of France's most famous intellectuals once studied in this library. But since the 1970s, their numbers have dwindled. Descendants of the likes of Sartre, Foucault, Derrida, Merleau-Ponty have failed to appear. Marc Crépon says it's due to French and European philosophy becoming less relevant.
The philosophical debates in Europe, from the perspective of the critical thought, or the dream of emancipation they can generate, seems to me more spent than it seems in the rest of the world. Places like Latin America, but even more in some ways in comparison to the African continent.
That's also the opinion held by Tariq Ali, an English historian, writer, and an editor of the New Left Review.
With the death of Daniel Ben Said, of Pierre Bourdieu, of Derrida, of others, we now have no public intellectuals worth the name. in French culture. So the role that France used to play in the world of being a laboratory of ideas and being the most advanced country in terms of it, that is finished.
Ali says the problems go further than France.
Europe has not produced an alternative, which is why the European Union is in a crisis. The situation in France, on every level, politically, economically, intellectually, is dire. It's the same with Italy, by the way. It's not France alone.
The dearth of new European ideas becomes more pronounced in comparison with the resurgence of US critical theory. That's the analysis of Paris-based author and sociologist Razmig Kushian.
To be inducted into the international field of critical thought, these critical thinkers still need to go through American universities and use English. Therefore, we could say it's a kind of paradoxical hegemony, a hegemony which is based on the capacity, as is often the case in the United States, to attract and absorb thinkers from countries who are different, even very far apart, and ensure they are offered working conditions which are better than in their own countries.
Provided, that is, they publish in English. Without speaking the language, they have no chance in forging their careers in the US. Giselle Sapiro has written a study on the translation of French works into English. She says English has become essential.
Since the 1960s or 70s, the US has had a kind of power of consecration, which is important in academic careers. For example, being translated and then published counts more and more.
Giselle Sapiro's study shows the continued interest from the US for the French sociologists and philosophers of the 60s and 70s, who are grouped together as French theory.
On the US side and on the Argentinian side, we still see a big interest for French theory. Some, like Derrida, have become classic. There's huge demand for Bourdieu's work, which is used in many research programs across the US.
Bourdieu, Derrida, the same names always come up, writers long gone and with nobody to replace them. One consequence is that translations from French to English have declined. Things aren't looking great at another central place of European critical thought, the Institute of Social Research in Frankfurt. Director Axel Onnert says that he's very worried for the state of Europe.
What I see is that there is no core concept. Yeah? So you have a lot of very different directions of a kind of critical theory which is not longer dominated by the Frankfurt School. So the monopoly of the Frankfurt School has gone away. Lukács, history and class.
This monopoly, founded by famous thinkers like Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, Habermas, has indeed disappeared. The library of Adorno, a historical figure of the Frankfurt School, is no more than a museum. It contains sheet music, one of Adorno's big interests, and his favorite authors, Ibsen, Tolstoy, Marx, and above all, Kierkegaard. Being Jewish, Adorno was forced into exile in the US during the Second World War, but eventually decided to return to Germany after the conflict.
Adorno was very strangely convinced that the working conditions in post-fascist Germany would be better than in the United States. And it's very strange. He had a certain kind of optimism about the German population. I think it was really optimism.
60 years later, the optimism has dissolved. Onnert says he feels helpless faced with European populist movements like these anti-Muslim, anti-immigration demonstrations which have surfaced in Germany.
The conditions are threatening. Yeah? The conditions seem to be completely hopeless. So there is no social movement visible. The only social movements which are visible are at the moment neo-populist movements in the States and here in France, now in Germany even, in the Netherlands, and so on and so on. So it's threatening. And what it probably would need now is to understand better the motives for the success of these neo-populist movements and to deal with that more sufficiently and better.
One of the most influential African intellectuals, Suleiman Bachir Diagne, says a better understanding of Islam is needed and that answers should be provided. Diagne has taught Islamic critical philosophy at the University of Columbia since 2008.
Islam nowadays needs to be re-educated into its own spirit of pluralism and tolerance, and that is a very important lesson that I like to spread around. Education is the key, absolutely. Education is the basis for everything.
His students have learned that education can be a powerful weapon.
Well, I remember once Professor Bashir said that there are problems that used to be solved by the pen, which are currently solved by the sword. I think that was really interesting.
Suleiman Bachir Diagne grew up in Senegal, then attended the best French colleges before heading to the US. He illustrates the modern globalization of critical thought and its current home on US soil.
Okay, that brings us to the end of this edition of Beyond Business. Thank you for watching. And if you want to see this or any other show on France 24 again, you can go to our website, france24.com. Stay with us. We've got more news coming your way.